If it wasn't obvious by the title, I'm going to explain how to play every single class in Team Fortress 2 in just one video. tf2 is a complex game, so for my own sanity as well as yours, I'm going to keep each class's guide somewhat short. The goal of this video isn't to be an exhaustive guide for each class, but rather a starting point for beginners and supplementary knowledge for intermediate players. This video would never be finished if I tried to include everything. Instead, I'm going to do my best to summarize each class's kit and explain how to squeeze value out of it to help your team. For that reason, I won't be mentioning the majority of unlockable weapons unless it is relevant at the moment, or the unlock is an essential part of a class's arsenal. The first class in the class selection menu is the Scout, so I will start there. Scout has the fastest movement in the game, as well as a base kit double jump. He is tied for the lowest base health in the game with only 125 HP. His primary weapon, the Scattergun, can dispatch opponents very quickly, able to two-shot 8 of the 9 classes if he lands all of his pellets, although you have to be very close to do so because of damage falloff and ramp-up mechanics. This effectively means Scout is a glass cannon. He packs a punch, but he also dies very quickly if the other team can hit him. And let me tell you, hitting a good Scout can be very difficult. Scout relies on his movement speed and double jump to avoid taking damage as much as possible. Scout's secondary is the pistol, which is an effective finisher weapon, although at very close ranges where the downside of random spread is negligible, it is reminiscent of the lightning gun from Quake. For optimal damage with both the shotgun and the pistol, aim for the opponent's center of mass. Headshots don't deal any extra damage for most weapons in TF2, so by aiming for the center of mass, you are maximizing the number of bullets that land. The Scout is arguably the best 1 vs 1 class, although Soldier and Demoman can definitely give him a run for his money. When playing Scout, I always try to isolate favorable 1v1 fights and avoid fights that are bad for me. Because he moves so fast, he has the ability to be picky with his fights and can run away if you see a bad one. If you see multiple enemies, or even just one you feel like you can't handle alone, just run away. Being overconfident and committing to a bad fight will usually end in a swift demise because of your low health. An experienced Scout player is constantly weaving in and out of the fight, expertly avoiding damage while dishing out mid-range shots and going in for the kill when an opportunity arises. There will be situations when there are a number of opportunities all chained one after another, and these are some of the most fun moments in TF2 because you can just go on a killing spree, winning 1v1 after 1v1. Just because you have the ability to run away doesn't mean you should, especially if you can tell you can keep pushing your advantage. Outside of winning one-on-one fights, the Scout's movement is extremely helpful for his team too. He can find opportunities to run to his team's aid, turning 1v1s into 2v1s. Because your mobility is completely free, you can basically run around and do whatever you want as long as you are actively avoiding taking any damage. Falling below the 100 health threshold, things get a bit scary. Rockets, grenades, and scatterguns can and will one-shot you at this range, so you will want to make sure your health is topped off as much as possible. Speaking of 2v1s and playing as a team, the Scout is a really good heal target for medics. I know, in Meet the Medic, the Heavy is the one who gets Ubered. For newer players, it can be tempting to only heal the big beefy power classes like Soldier and Heavy, and by all means, spread the heals around your team. Every class benefits from heals and buffs. More on that when I get to Medic. Anyways, taking a step back, the Scout's primary weakness is his low health. By healing a Scout, you are covering for this weakness, turning him from an overconfident ball boy to an efficient killing machine. So, heal your Scouts please. Also, healing a Scout with your medigun will give the medic Scout speed, so if you are in a bad situation as a medic, you can use this to your advantage, so there's another reason to heal your Scouts. Anyways, back to Scout. Like all classes in Team Fortress 2, the Scout benefits from playing on the high ground. His double jump facilitates getting onto height, as well as switching between different high points with ease. His double jump isn't just useful for positioning either. You can use his jumps as a way to bait rockets from a Soldier or grenades from a Demoman. In close quarters, you can use your speed and jumps to weave in and out of an opponent's field of view while hitting them with meat shots in the process. As a Scout, abusing your movement abilities in combination with props and high ground spots is essential. When you really think about it, this is all the Scout has in his favor. This simple ability alone is enough to make Scout a top tier class. Just remember, if you cannot effectively dodge, you will die very fast. Scout is obviously a fantastic flanker because of his movement speed, but he has some unlocks that will help with this as well. The winger significantly increases his jump height when held out, making for some crazy fast flank opportunities. Unlike explosive jumping, these winger jumps have no explosion as a sound cue, which is invaluable for flanking. The Atomizer gives Scout a third jump when held out, which opens up similar possibilities as the winger, but in the melee spot. Swiftwater is a map with a ton of great examples of flanks that are made possible by double jumping with the winger. I think these clips do a pretty decent job of demonstrating the versatility of Scout's movement and his ability to flank. The Scout does have some big weaknesses, his low health pool being the main one, although as I said it can be mitigated by a good medic. He also struggles with pushing through choke points because they greatly limit his movement options. As a Scout, playing against a very coordinated team can be extremely difficult as well because there are simply less 1v1 opportunities. And of course, there is the Sentry Gun. It turns out that a class whose entire shtick is being hard to hit gets countered by the robot with perfect aim. A well-placed Sentry Gun essentially creates a bubble that the Scout cannot enter without draining his precious health. If you turn a corner and find yourself face to face with a sentry and you don't have time to get out of its line of sight, try damage surfing away by jumping and holding crouch. This has saved me from dying a number of times when I am not paying attention and run right into a sentry. If you are paying attention, you should be able to hear the beeping sound that a Sentry Gun makes. You have some options to help deal with the sentry, such as spamming it out with your pistol or trying to bypass it with the Bonk Atomic Punch. However, most of the time you will be relying on your team to deal with the sentry for you. Who would have thought that you would have to rely on your team in a game called Team Fortress 2? Crazy. Anyway, speaking of being a team player, the Scout also captures objectives such as the payload or a control point at double the normal rate because apparently running fast and killing everything wasn't already good enough. Soldier has 200 health and the second slowest base movement speed in the game, beating only Heavy. Keep in mind that this is just base movement speed. He is actually the most maneuverable mercenary when you consider rocket jumping. I said the most maneuverable, not the fastest, because that title goes to Demoman, but more on that later. By the way, even if you don't think Soldier is your cup of tea and you would rather play a different class, I would highly recommend learning how to rocket jump if you haven't already. Learning the rocket jump forces you to learn source movement, which is invaluable knowledge for all classes in tf2. Take surfing enemy damage for example. You are never going to be able to surf an opponent's rocket to safety if you don't know how to use your own rocket to jump. So learn the basics of rocket jumping. Anyways, Soldier has his rocket launcher as his primary, although I usually use the original, which is the exact same thing except the rockets fire slightly differently. Just like Scout's scattergun, Soldier's rocket launcher can two-shot all classes at close range except for the Heavy. Unlike Scout, Soldier has a lot of health, so he typically benefits from being very close to his opponents because he can generally outdamage per second his foe. Furthermore, direct rockets are much easier to land at close ranges and will benefit from damage ramp-up. The rocket launcher is also an effective long-range spam weapon. You won't usually get any frags spamming rockets from across the map, but you can soften up the other team before actually engaging with them this way, and you can also finish off retreating enemies. Also, if you get a random crit rocket, you might get a cheeky kill as well because crits ignore damage fall off. Just be careful to avoid spamming rockets at a Pyro at long and medium ranges, because more often than not, the Pyro will airblast them back at you and your team, dealing bonus mini-crit damage. The rocket launcher obviously does splash damage, so you can use corners and choke points to your advantage. A great example of this is Soldier's matchup versus a Heavy. You really don't want to be up close to a Heavy unless you have cover, or he will shred you before you can take him out. Map geometry can be used to corner peek a Heavy, essentially protecting most of your hitbox while still allowing you to fire rockets. This method also works very well against the other mercs as well as sentry guns. Since Soldier's base movement speed is so slow, you will often choose to trade health and ammo for movement speed via rocket jump. This is useful both during downtime to simply get from point A to point B, but it is extremely useful during teamfights as well. You can bomb an opponent, retreat from a bad fight, or reposition to a health pack, and even jump to avoid damage. Getting into the headspace that loaded rockets and health are a resource is essential for Soldier players. Without enough health and rockets loaded, you cannot rocket jump, and without rocket jumps, you are stuck waddling almost as slowly as a heavy. Soldier is still a pretty strong class without rocket jumping, but trust me when I say his full potential is unlocked by going super fast. Also, going super fast is just really fun. The Soldier's secondary is the shotgun, which is essentially the same as a scattergun, but with less maximum damage. Shotgun can do at most 90 damage, so at very close ranges the rocket launcher has a higher possible damage output, with 110 being its own cap. That being said, rockets will deal self-damage at point blank, so it can still be worth it to use the shotgun in these scenarios. I primarily use the shotgun as a finisher weapon to clean up weak opponents to save a rocket, or as a way to quickly dispatch an opponent when I have no rockets loaded. Because rockets are a projectile, but bullets are hit scan, you can actually sync up a rocket and a shotgun shell to effectively one-shot lighter classes. The shotgun is a potent secondary, but I personally use the gunboats most of the time, and would recommend the gunboats to anybody who has learned the basics of rocket jumping. The gunboats essentially reduce the cost of rocket jumping, and more rocket jumps means more speed. This allows for a roaming playstyle similar to how Scout plays, isolating favorable 1v1s and retreating from losing fights. Obviously, the main difference here is that Scout just moves fast, but Soldier has to use health and ammo to move even faster. You can essentially rocket jump for free with the gunboats by jumping to health packs. If you are chaining multiple jumps together, try to land on or near a pack to replenish your health. Soldier is a good class to be taking these packs because the amount of health they give is a percentage of your base health, which Soldier has a lot of. Due to the nature of his rocket launcher, the Soldier's 1v1 style is a bit more committal, meaning when taking a 1v1, it is oftentimes ideal to jump at and land right next to your target. Just like the Scout, the Soldier can pick his fights. If you see an unwinnable fight, just jump away. This might prove problematic when indoors, so be sure to be smart about your positioning. Since you are able to close the distance between yourself and a target extremely quickly, you can usually force a trade when playing Soldier. A great example of a trade that is usually worth it is a medic. If you are able to rocket jump in and guarantee that the other team's medic dies, it is typically worth it even if you also die in the process. Generally speaking, it is also good to trade for good demos and snipers. Heavy emphasis on the in general. Not all Soldier for medic trades are going to be worth it, it depends on the game state and the players. If a medic just uses Uber, I am usually not going to trade my life for his. I am also not going to trade my life for the free-to-play sniper who is shooting his SMG from across the map. The main limiter to a gunboat Soldier is his low ammo count. The rocket launcher only has 4 rockets, which also act as Soldier's main movement option, so use them wisely. Many times, it is beneficial to wait for the ongoing reload animation to finish before firing another rocket, even during fights. Interrupting a partially completed reload is sometimes ideal, but it is a good habit to keep at least 1 rocket loaded at all times. It's okay to go down to 0 rockets if you can finish off an important frag, but again, you usually want to have 1 rocket loaded. If you have no rockets loaded, you can't rocket jump. Just like every other class, Soldier greatly benefits from playing on high ground. Most obvious reason is it makes hitting splash rockets much easier. If my gameplay wasn't making it clear, it is best to aim rockets where you think the feet of your target will be. This way, even if your rocket doesn't directly hit, you will still deal some splash damage. You can get pretty creative with your rockets to get splash damage, such as shooting the walls or ceilings. Even if you aren't very good at rocket jumping, Soldier can be extremely effective if you position yourself in good spots. By playing on high ground near a health pack, you are making yourself hard to kill and setting yourself up for easy splash damage from the height. Soldier also has a number of unlockable weapons that allow him to play a more supportive role, such as the disciplinary action and his banners. I don't have time to go over these unlocks here, just know that Soldier has a wide range of possible playstyles. Pyro has a medium movement speed and 175 health. They also have the ability to air blast, which I will get to in a second. Pyro's primary weapon is the flamethrower. As is generally the case with flamethrowers in a shooter game, you need to be up close to deal damage. The caveat here is that the flamethrower actually has relatively bad damage per second when compared to the other primary weapons, and it requires prolonged line of sight to deal damage, so it is susceptible to getting corner peeked by single fire weapons. That being said, the flamethrower is an area of effect weapon that can and will deal damage to anything in its path, so large groups of enemies can be incinerated in seconds if the pyro is able to stay alive for long enough. A great example of this is when a medic ubers you. Since you are impervious to any damage, you can burn down large groups of enemies with ease. Because of the poor damage per second and requirement for close range and line of sight, Pyro relies a bit on the element of surprise to get kills with their flamethrower. Alternatively, the Pyro can use their secondary weapon at mid-range to soften up a target or to kill them outright. The Pyro's choice of secondary weapon greatly impacts their playstyle because of the flamethrower's shortcomings. Pyro's matchup versus Heavy does a good job of exemplifying this. Because a spun-up Heavy at close range will kill Pyro much faster than Pyro can kill Heavy, you need to keep the Heavy at mid to long range in order to win the engagement. You can airblast the Heavy away to make distance and throw off his aim, and then use your secondary to outclass him in the mid-range. Bonus points if you were able to corner peek the Heavy to minimize the amount of time he is able to shoot you. By default, the Pyro has the shotgun as their secondary weapon. The shotgun gives the Pyro the ability to deal damage outside of the range of their flamethrower, and the ability to corner peek due to its single-fire nature. Pyro also has unlocks such as the flare gun or the scorch shot, which allow for long-range spam options. The shotgun is obviously not very effective past a certain point. They also have secondary weapons that give them movement options, such as the detonator and the thermal thruster, which can be used to go for a more flank playstyle. Speaking of movement, I would highly recommend using the Power Jack as your go-to melee weapon. The Power Jack gives Pyro 15% bonus movement speed by simply holding it out, which is useful both in combat and out of combat. You can use it to chase retreating enemies, since the Power Jack will make the Pyro faster than everybody else except for Scout. It is also helpful to get to the front lines quicker while preserving crit heals. Just be aware that you take 20% more damage when you have the Power Jack held out. Pyro's flamethrowers have Air Blast as their secondary function. The Air Blast, you just right-click. You can use this to push around enemy players and reflect projectiles such as rockets and grenades back at the other team, dealing bonus mini-crit damage. Mini-crits ignore damage falloff, so you can actually snipe opponents with reflected rockets. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's usually not a good idea to shoot long-range rockets at a Pyro. While you can play Pyro like a damage per second character, I find that Pyro works best as a support class that is capable of fragging should the right situation arise. Note that this depends on the Pyro's choice of primary. Some primary weapons increase the Pyro's offensive capabilities, but impedes or completely removes his ability to airblast effectively. I personally use the Degreaser most of the time, which improves weapon switch speed at the cost of slightly more expensive airblasts and less afterburn damage. Pyro's airblast is very versatile and arguably their greatest strength. Airblasting projectiles is obviously useful when fighting soldiers and demos, but it is great for protecting your engineer nests too. Airblast can be used to deny Ubers, and it can also be used to send the opposition off the side of a cliff. You can also extinguish teammates with your airblast. Pyro's flames are also very good at finding invisible spies and spy-checking suspicious teammates. A disguised spy will be set alight by your flamethrower, immediately giving them away. All of this means that Pyro is very good at protecting valuable players such as medics, engineers, and demos. The ideal range for a Pyro to take fights at depends on the class the Pyro is facing. Playing at a mid-range versus soldiers is ideal, and maybe versus demos depending on the demo. This is because airblasting point-blank rockets requires a prediction, but mid-range rockets can simply be reacted to. Pyro wants to be up close to weaker 1v1 classes to burn them before they can escape, such as Medic and Sniper. You will want to avoid being close to heavies because they will kill you much quicker than you can kill them, unless you can get the drop on them, or they are busy fighting your team. Scout obviously runs much faster than you, so as a result, an aware Scout can stay just outside of your effective range while still dealing significant damage to you. For this reason, you will want to avoid direct combat with Scouts unless you can surprise them up close. Similar to Scout, the Pyro is countered by sentry guns due to his lack of any significant long-range damage. You are able to reflect level 3 sentry rockets back at the sentry and engineer, which is really fun, but outside of this and spamming the sentry from a distance with your secondary, you will have to rely on your team to deal with engineer nests. Just like the soldier, Pyro has a lot of different playstyles because of his versatile arsenal, so I would encourage you to experiment. For example, the Dragon's Fury turns Pyro from a more support-oriented character to a powerful damage per second character. Just remember that these more offensive primaries usually impact your ability to airblast. This is a really big deal. As I mentioned before, Demoman is technically the fastest class in the game because of his sticky jumper. The practicality of going this fast is definitely questionable, but it is very fun and gets even more ridiculous when you combo the jumper with the Ulpool Caber. Anyways, when you ignore somewhat gimmicky unlocks, Demoman moves a bit faster than Soldier but still pretty slow. Just like Pyro, he has 175 health. By default, Demoman has the grenade launcher as his primary and the sticky bomb launcher as his secondary. By the way, for most of these clips, I'm using the Iron Bomber, which is almost identical to the stock grenade launcher. He can sticky jump with the regular sticky bomb launcher, but this does a lot of self-damage and is not instantaneous due to his sticky bomb arm time, so it is not typically practical during combat. What Demoman lacks in sustainable mobility, he makes up for in raw damage output. His projectiles do a ton of damage, and he has a lot of them. His grenade launcher shoots a grenade that explodes immediately if it directly hits an opponent. If the grenade doesn't land, it will roll around on the ground and eventually explode, dealing significantly less damage. Just like Soldier's rockets, Demoman's grenades have a pretty generous explosion radius, so they are especially dangerous when the other team is grouped up. When you are aiming both grenades and stickies, which I will get to in a second, you will usually want to aim higher than head level, although at very close ranges, aiming for head level or center of mass is ideal. Speaking of ranges, I have already mentioned damage falloff and ramp up a few times in this video since it is such a huge part of tf2's balance. Unlike Soldier's rockets, Demoman's grenades are not impacted by damage ramp up or falloff. A Hail Mary pipe from across the map that connects will deal 100 damage, and a point blank direct hit will also deal 100 damage. Demo's sticky bomb launcher is in his secondary slot, but in reality it functions as another primary weapon because it is so good. In fact, I would argue that the sticky bomb launcher is the strongest weapon in Team Fortress 2, rivaled by few. The sticky bomb launcher is an extremely versatile weapon in the right hands, although it takes a while to get used to because it is so unique. The sticky bombs it shoots will stick to almost any surface, and they will not detonate until the Demoman manually detonates, right-click by default. Sticky bombs will not stick to players, engineers' buildings, or the payload cart. Sticky bombs can be charged by holding left-click, which will increase their velocity upon firing. Please note that while charging a sticky, you won't be reloading in the background, so there's a trade-off. One of Demoman's main weaknesses is how long it takes to reload when you empty all your clips, so keep ammo management in mind. Upon detonation, all active sticky bombs will explode at once. This means that Demoman can place a trap over a doorway or commonly traveled route and detonate it on an unsuspecting enemy. You can have 8 stickies total placed, and upon firing a 9th bomb, the initial sticky bomb will detonate if you have not detonated already. There is a short 0.7 second arm timer once a sticky bomb is fired, but once you get used to this, the sticky bombs are also very useful in direct combat. You can also switch between your sticky bombs and grenades during combat, which is an effective way to increase your damage per second due to sticky bomb arm timers. It takes less time to switch weapons on fire than it does to fire again, so sinking a sticky bomb and a pipe onto a target is very effective. Demoman is the only class except for Medic that entirely lacks any form of hit scan damage, and his projectiles all deal self-damage at point-blank ranges, so he is vulnerable if his opponent is able to get up close. Scouts, pyros, soldiers, and even spies are often going to try to do this, so you will have to do your best to position in such a way to prevent this from happening. Because of the way his projectiles work, the Demoman thrives at mid-range. The sticky bomb arm timer means that sticky bombs are less viable at very close ranges. At mid-range, sticky bombs can be spammed on an opponent and detonated immediately. Grenades are also easier to land at this range as well, so you will want to be taking fights with this spacing whenever possible. Just like everybody else, Demoman benefits from high ground. Unlike Soldier and Scout, he is uniquely capable of damaging players who are above him because his projectiles travel in an arc. The arc of Demoman's projectiles assist him in many ways. You can find unique spam angles that will net you free damage and kills without even having line of sight on the target. Remember how grenades have no damage falloff? The arc combined with the lack of falloff means that this spam method is especially effective when spamming the payload cart or other objectives because you can two-shot most classes from a long distance. In the case of spamming an objective, you will have an indicator on your HUD telling you that the other team is doing the objective, which makes this even easier when you don't have line of sight. Just like the scattergun and the rocket launcher, Demo's projectiles are single fire, so a Demo can corner peek heavies and sentries to deal maximum damage while minimizing the damage he takes. Because of the projectile arc, Demoman can take this a step further and abuse props and map geometry to shoot things without even peeking them in the first place. This is a good time to mention melee weapons. Unlike the Scout, Soldier, and Pyro, whose melee weapons are largely for utility, the Demoman will occasionally find himself in a situation where his best way of dealing damage is with his melee weapon. Because his primary and secondary weapons deal self-damage, you might have to whip out your trusty bottle to finish off an up-close enemy. Demo is pretty much the only class in the game that doesn't have a melee weapon that is straight up better than its stock counterpart, so I would recommend sticking with the stock bottle or a reskin. If you are the type who likes to play characters that are difficult but have a very high skill ceiling, or you just like dealing a lot of damage, I think Demoman is the class for you. Also, just like Soldier, Demo has a wide pool of unlocks that give him playstyles that differ from the stock experience, which this guide is mostly focused on. In my humble and totally unbiased opinion as a Demoman main, Demo has the widest and most fun array of playstyles, including but not limited to literally flying around the map with the sticky jumper, literally flying around the map with the tide turner, decapitating the opposition as a full Demo Knight, creating and maintaining a minefield with the Scottish Resistance, cosplaying as an artillery cannon with the Quickie Bomb launcher, and of course literally flying with the loose cannon. Also, some of these playstyles aren't mutually exclusive because the items that make them possible take up a different slot. For example, the loose cannon is a primary and the tide turner is a secondary, so you can do whatever the fuck this is in an actual game. Moving on to the 5th class, Heavy is the slowest moving mercenary, but he also has the most health by far. His primary weapon is the minigun, which needs to be spun up before firing. When the minigun is spun up, the Heavy moves even slower, and the minigun makes a loud sound. Of course, the trade-off to all of this is that the minigun does a hell of a lot of damage, at least up close. And in order to deal damage, you have to be able to track your opponents. Similar to Pyro's flamethrower, the minigun needs line of sight to deal damage, and when combined with Heavy's very slow movement speed, this can be exploited by classes that have single fire weapons by corner peeking you. For this reason, I find that Heavy is most effective when you are corner peeking an opponent to catch them in spots that they have no cover, or by waiting for them to peek you and shredding them before they have a chance to retreat. Ideally, you will only be encountering enemies when you are already spun up, since you can't deal damage with your primary without being spun up first. Heavy does have the shotgun as his secondary, although his lunchbox items are generally a safer bet. He can heal himself completely by eating his sandwich, or using the Delocos bar to get extra health. His food items can also be thrown onto the ground with right click, and they will act like a health pack for teammates. Just be careful where you put your lunch because enemies can also pick it up. If you do decide to run the shotgun, it is useful to use when retreating or repositioning since it allows Heavy to deal damage on demand without having to spin up. If you aren't using the shotgun, remember that you are at a huge disadvantage if you are caught by an opponent unprepared. Not only will it take time for you to spin up your minigun, but there is also a hidden accuracy and damage debuff for the first second after spinning up. Again, the ideal situation for a Heavy is being spun up and turning the corner into an enemy with no cover or an enemy wide swinging into you when you are already spun up. Outside of these situations, Heavy can struggle. Despite being a giant guy with a minigun, Heavy is an underdog in Team Fortress 2. More maneuverable classes like Scout and Soldier can just run away from a well-positioned Heavy and then recommit when the Heavy is spun down or already busy with something else. Any class with a single fire weapon can abuse corners to win a fight with a Heavy even at close range, and in some cases Demoman can outdamage per second a Heavy in the mid-range. Snipers can easily take out a Heavy from across the map, especially if the Heavy is out in the open. Also, spies don't care about your massive health pool since they can just stab you in the back to instantly kill you. When you're playing Heavy, or just tf2 in general, make sure you are frequently turning around and spy checking teammates to ensure your back remains unstabbed. Remember, just because Heavy is a tank doesn't mean that you want to be tanking damage. Heavy's 300 health disappears really quickly. 3 direct grenades, 3 to 4 scattergun shots, or 3 to 4 direct rockets will leave you bankrupt in the health department. Heavy's slow movement means that he isn't able to hang on to his health nearly as much as somebody like Scout. It's a lot easier to hit Heavy than it is to hit Scout. Because of this, you should do your best to abuse head glitches. Heavy's bullets come out of his eyes, not his minigun, so you can protect most of your hitbox by head glitching. In this clip, the quick fix Uber definitely helped me, but I took a lot less damage because I was in a head glitch. Also, when you can, peek when your team is already fighting. This will minimize the damage that you take and allow you to support your team by taking some pressure off of them. Remember how exploitable Heavy's weaknesses are, be patient, play smart, and you will frag. Despite having lower mechanical requirements than other classes, Heavy is still hard to master. Being a god tier Heavy requires a great deal of game sense to overcome all of these downsides. Map knowledge, awareness, and positioning are the name of the game when it comes to playing Heavy. Unlike all the other classes, Heavy's arsenal of weapons don't really provide playstyles that differ from his stock experience. For example, in a lot of my clips, I'm using the Tomislav, which is basically just a more accurate minigun with silent rev. Despite this, Heavy is still a very fun and interesting class, not necessarily due to his kit being super interesting or unique like Demo or Spy, but because of how Heavy interacts with the rest of the mercs. At the end of the day, when you do manage to be in the right spot at the right time, Heavy is incredibly satisfying to play, even if he doesn't have all the bells and whistles that the other classes have. Speaking of bells and whistles, Engineer is a low health, medium speed class. His primary and secondary are the shotgun and the pistol, so nothing new there. Engi's class identity lies in his ability to build buildings and play a more supportive role. If you are brand new to first-person shooters, Engineer might be the class for you. His buildings do most of the heavy lifting for him, you just need to build them. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, hauling a giant metal sentry gun around could probably be considered heavy lifting, but you get the point. While this seems simple at a glance, playing Engineer is a constant balancing act of keeping your buildings alive, deciding to move up or retreat depending on the game state, and rebuilding when your nest inevitably gets destroyed. Engineer has his sentry gun, which has perfect aim but a limited range. The sentry gun is not typically going to get kills if it is left unattended and unprotected because it is easily corner peeked or spammed out from afar. But when a sentry nest is supported with the team in front, it is a very potent area denial tool. Your sentry gun should be placed in a spot that is passive enough so that you have time to level it up and maintain it, but also aggressive enough that it is giving your team room to breathe if they have to back up. Engineer's second building is the dispenser, which gives teammates standing near it both health and ammo. You should aim to place your dispenser aggressive enough that it will provide your teammates a safe place to heal without having to back up too far. Lastly, the Engineer has the teleporter, which is an invaluable tool to get your team to the front lines quickly after respawning. You will have to place the entrance and the exit for the teleporter to work. Make sure you aren't doing it backwards because teleporters are one way. Depending on the map, your teleporter can be used as a flanking tool to provide a route for you and your teammates to get behind the other team. While this isn't always a good idea, it is pretty fun to get behind the other team using the Eureka effect. The main use of teleporters is to allow your team to get to the front lines as quickly as possible after respawning. The usefulness of a teleporter depends on the map because some maps are so tiny that a teleporter might not be worth building at all. Also, the power of a teleporter can depend on the time in the match because spawn locations can change as the game progresses. I firmly believe that the teleporter is Engineer's strongest building, and it should take priority over dispensers and sentry guns in most situations. A good example of a situation where teleporters are game-winning is when pushing Badwater third as the blue team. Blue's respawn stays in the same spot until they are able to push the cart to the third checkpoint, so by building the teleporter entrance all the way back at spawn on first, and building an exit somewhere safe on the third point, you are essentially cutting down your team's spawn timers by 10 to 15 seconds. Compare this game-winning advantage to attacking first on the same map. There is no real use for a teleporter in this game state because blue team's spawn is literally right next to the fight. Okay, now that you have an idea of what each building does, let me talk about actually building and upgrading them. By default, to build a building, you switch to your construction PDA in the 4th weapon slot. Select which building you want to build and hit the corresponding number, which will then give Engineer the building. Left click will place down the building, which can be built in most places, although most spawn rooms will not allow you to place anything. When you have the building held, you can rotate it by right clicking before placing it down. You will want to place teleporters against a wall or in a corner to prevent enemy spies from camping the teleporter exit. Exits teleport their rider facing a set direction, which is indicated by an arrow on the blueprint, so you will want to make sure this arrow is facing away from the wall. The Engineer has a unique resource called Metal, which is used to build and upgrade buildings. All the buildings start at level 1, but can be repaired and upgraded by hitting them with his wrench. Metal can be replenished from ammo packs on the map, as well as dropped by dead players, from dispensers, from the payload cart, and from the resupply cabinet. As I mentioned earlier, Engineer's default primary weapon is the shotgun. This means that Engineer is still a capable combat class even if he doesn't have his sentry built, but he is generally at a disadvantage without his buildings. A buildingless Engineer is essentially just a worse scout, but he still shouldn't be underestimated. Speaking of the shotgun, you can use it to shoot spies who put their sapper onto your buildings. Sapped buildings are disabled, so if a spy saps your sentry, it won't be able to shoot anything, and it will slowly take damage. In order to remove a sapper, you hit it with your wrench 2 times, or 3 if you're using the jag. Be aware that a spy can just immediately resap the building again before you can repair it, so make sure you kill the spy first. You can fake out the spy by appearing to remove the sapper by hitting it with your wrench, only to leave it 1 shot away from being removed to bait the spy into walking towards your sentry to resap it. I am trying my best to keep on topic for this guide, but since I'm talking about Engineer during combat, I can't help but mention the Gunslinger, which replaces Engineer's stock wrench. The Gunslinger gives Engie an extra 25 health, bumping him into the medium health category. The Gunslinger also replaces Engineer's upgradable sentry guns with a mini sentry, which is cheaper and builds faster at the cost of dealing less damage and not being upgradable. This single unlock transforms an Engineer from a support character with the means to protect himself to a support character with a penchant for murder. Regardless of your melee of choice, remember that as an Engineer, your primary role is support. On many maps that are popular and casual, Engineer plays a vital role in both offense and defense. Medic is a medium health, fast-moving support class. He is the backbone of any good team, as well as the undisputed strongest class in Team Fortress 2. In fact, I would argue that the Medic has 3 meta-defining abilities that no other class possesses. More on those in just a minute. Many other class-based shooters, it's a class-based shooter, not a hero shooter by the way, do this thing where healers are damage per second characters in disguise, but tf2 is not this way. Medic's primary goal is to be a healer, and an efficient medic player will avoid situations that require him to get his own hands dirty. Sure, the medic is capable of getting frags, but he is greatly disadvantaged against all other classes in a 1 vs 1 situation. While all other classes have some form of healing ability available to them through their unlocks, Medic is the king of healing in TF2. His primary weapon is the syringe gun, which is quite weak and awkward to use. The syringe gun is the only stock primary in the game that is just straight up worse than an unlockable item in every single way. If you are brand new to TF2, my advice is just never use this thing. I would recommend equipping the Crusader's crossbow as soon as you get it because it allows you to heal your teammates from long ranges, as well as burst heal weak players faster than you would with your medigun. Speaking of the medigun, Medic's medigun is in his secondary slot, but it is truly his primary weapon, if you can call it a weapon. The 3 meta-defining mechanics all stem from this medigun, so I am going to get into a lot of detail. Bear with me here, this is all really important for playing Medic. At surface level, the medigun is quite simple. Place your crosshair on a teammate and hold left click. The medigun will begin to heal the patient at a base rate of 24 health per second. Once the medigun is healing someone, the medic can look around freely and it will continue to heal unless the patient goes out of range or is separated by a wall for too long. This means that the medic can afford to keep his head on a swivel while still healing his teammates efficiently. Once the teammate is at full health, the medigun will continue to overheal them to a maximum of 150% of their base health. Overheals slowly decay over time. A full overheal will completely decay after 15 seconds. And there you have the first meta-defining ability in the Medic's arsenal, reliable heals and overheals. The only other reliable source of health is health packs, and depending on the map you are playing on, these can be extremely scarce. Most of you are probably not very impressed. Of course, the medic can heal people. Well, I think most TF2 players underestimate the strength of an overheal, but let me move on to the next thing. The medigun is actually capable of healing teammates much faster than the base 24 health per second, capping at 72 health per second, which is 3 times the normal rate. This is known as crit heals, and a teammate will be able to be crit healed if they have not taken damage in the last 10 seconds or since respawning. Please note that after 10 seconds of not taking damage, crit heals start at slightly more than the base rate and then increase all the way to the 3 times number. Anyways, when you combine crit heals with overheals, you can really start to see how powerful these mechanics are, especially when working together. You can single-handedly increase your team's total health by around 25 to 30% at the start of the round by just simply passing out crit overheals. As I hinted at before, I think that crit overheals are probably the most overlooked mechanic by new and even intermediate medic players. Similar to how teleporters can win games by effectively decreasing a team's respawn timer, a medic who passes out crit overheals to freshly spawned teammates can dish out crazy amounts of health across the course of a game. In fact, if you take a close look at the end of the round scoreboard, you can see an effective medic not only outheals other medics by a wide margin, but he also outperforms the other team's damage dealers. A single good medic can heal significantly more health than a single player can deal damage. But medic's power doesn't stop here. As a medic is healing his teammates, he slowly builds uber charge. Similar to the base heal rate, the uber charge build rate varies depending on a few factors. If the heal target is being healed by another source, such as another medic or a dispenser, the build rate is reduced. The build rate is also reduced if you are healing a fully buffed target. Building an uber as quickly as possible is pretty important for medics. Once the uber charge meter reaches 100%, medic can right-click with his medigun deployed to use the uber. Uber lasts for 8 seconds and makes the medic and his heal target invincible. Medics can flash other players to give them invincibility, but this will unuber the original target after a brief second. Furthermore, flashing teammates will decrease the total duration of the uber for each flash. The uber charge is obviously a strong offensive tool, allowing for the attacking team to break through choke points, clear out sentry nests, and create space for their team. I am going to specifically avoid going into any depth about proper uber usage because uber theory could easily be a 20-minute video of its own. Long story short, uber is really good not only on attack but also on defense, but in the context of a casual environment you should probably follow the age-old adage, pop it, don't drop it. If you die at 100% uber, you lose it. Obviously, in order to get an uber, the medic has to stay alive. Because medic isn't very good at defending himself, and he is most valuable to his team when he is able to consistently get uber charge, you should try to play safely and position behind your patients. Make sure you are abusing the medigun's auto-aim, and keep your head on a swivel for potential threats. If you feel unsafe, you should probably trust your intuition and move to a safer spot. Staying alive as medic is pretty much your #1 priority because you provide so much value to your team when you're alive. Okay, so I have dumped a ton of information just now about overheals, crit heals, and uber charges, the 3 very important medic mechanics. You might be overwhelmed, but the main roadblock to getting good at medic is understanding these 3 mechanics and implementing them into your gameplay. Once a medic has a grasp on these things, it doesn't take a great deal of mechanical skill to carry your team because you can simply focus on staying alive and efficiently dishing out critical overheals and building uber efficiently. Doing these 3 things will win you most casual games. Speaking of efficiency, a great deal of getting good at medic is getting good at being efficient. Efficient heal orders, efficient use of overheal and crit heals, and efficient uber charges are a big part of what makes a medic a good medic. Besides the other unlockable mediguns, which are outside of the scope of this video, the final piece of the puzzle is the Crusader's crossbow. I alluded to this item a few minutes ago. It is medic's undisputed best primary weapon. The crossbow provides 2 main utilities to you. Firstly, the ability to burst heal low health teammates. At short ranges, the crossbow heals teammates for roughly 75 health, which when you do the math, it is much quicker than just beaming them with your medigun, unless they have crit heals. The downside to abusing this burst healing with the crossbow is that you build uber less quickly, but in my opinion, having your teammates be as healthy as possible is more important than building uber quickly in a pub environment. The second use of the crossbow is to clutch up at long ranges and heal your allies. The crossbow has reverse damage and healing ramp up, meaning that at long ranges it will heal much more than the base 75, so you can literally be a teammate's guardian angel from across the map if you get really good with this thing. Also, it's okay at self-defense if you absolutely need it, and it can be used to snipe opponents across the map as well. Speaking of sniping, Sniper is a low health, medium speed class. His primary weapon is the sniper rifle, which completely ignores all damage falloff and can headshot while scoped in. Scoped in headshots deal a 3 times damage critical hit. Shots can also be charged to deal up to 3 times damage after around 3 seconds, meaning that a fully charged headshot will deal 9 times the base damage of 50, totaling to 450 damage. This is enough to one-shot all classes even if they are overhealed by a medic. When the sniper is scoped in, his crosshair will leave a team color dot on the wall or floor. This will alert aware enemies of your existence, so it can be best to hide the dot by putting your crosshair somewhere that can't easily be seen by enemies. Speaking of your crosshair placement is extremely important for Sniper. You should be doing your best to keep your crosshair where your opponents will be. This will reduce the time it takes for you to aim your shots, since good crosshair placement usually means all you have to do is click on the head. I am first bringing this up in the Sniper section because Sniper arguably benefits the most from crosshair placement, but it is important for every class in Team Fortress 2. Sniper's secondary is the SMG, which does suffer from damage falloff, so don't try to use it like you're using an SMG in Call of Duty. The SMG functions similar to Engineer and Scout's pistol, and it is most effective at close ranges. As the only effective long-range class in Team Fortress 2, you will want to avoid being in a situation where an opponent is close to you whenever possible. At close range, you are outgunned by pretty much everyone except for the medic. If you do find yourself fighting at close range, you can fire a sniper rifle shot, switch to the SMG, and then switch back to the sniper rifle again and fire right away. This is because even though the sniper rifle is bolt action, it will magically reload itself when holstered. If it wasn't obvious already, the sniper rifle is 100% accurate whether or not you are scoped in, so you can no-scope from across the map to finish off low players. Sniper's gameplay loop is relatively simple, but as with all the mercenaries, his effectiveness can be improved with smart positioning. Ideally, you want to be as far away from your target as possible to take advantage of your superior range, but you don't want to isolate yourself from the rest of your team or you will get caught out by spies and other flankers. Finding a good balance between far away from my enemies and close to my team can be somewhat difficult, especially when you consider that all the other mercenaries are really only effective at close to mid-range, meaning that your team doesn't want to hide in a remote corner with you. If you find yourself getting jumped by a spy and there's nobody around to help you, going for the point-blank headshot is a difficult but rewarding play. Soldier is another class that can close the distance between you and him, so if you find yourself face-to-face with a soldier, you can attempt to surf away. Outside of flankers and spies, your other main threat as a sniper is other snipers. If you have better aim, this matchup isn't that bad, but be careful to avoid getting caught by the other sniper peeking a weird off angle. If you are losing the aim battle, you can still win the sniper v sniper by charging up a shot and peeking into the other sniper as opposed to holding angles yourself. On pretty much every map, there are going to be multiple different sight lines, so keep the other sniper guessing by peeking different angles and continuing to rotate. Following the same line of thought, don't overcommit to holding angles with a charged shot. When you're scoped in, you move really slowly and have no vision, so you're a sitting duck when holding a shot. I usually find that staying mobile and going for quickscopes works the best for me. The only time I really commit to holding an angle and charging a shot up is if I feel like I'm safe because my team is around me, and I know that I'm not going to get ran at by like a soldier or a spy. In this clip on Upward, I see that half of red is dead, so I feel pretty comfortable walking up to this sightline and charging up shots to pick off anyone who peeks. I could go for quickscopes in the same spot, but then I won't be able to one-shot heavier classes who peek me. In this case, I'm willing to trade my survivability for an increased chance of getting a frag, which ends up paying off in the end. The other main time I use a fully charged shot is if I am peeking into a sightline I expect another sniper to be holding. If there is another sniper holding the angle, I am able to easily body shot him for 150 damage. Keep in mind this won't one-shot an overhealed sniper, so go for the headshot whenever possible. Speaking of overheals, this really isn't in your control, but try to be overhealed whenever possible as a sniper because again, if you get fully charged body shot, you can survive. Without going deep into tack shooter fundamentals, just try to be as far away from the object you're peeking around. Because of how hitboxes and line of sight works in a shooter game, if you're really close to a corner as you're peeking it, your hitbox is going to be visible before you're able to see the people around the corner, but if you're far away from the corner, you have a much better, it's just more favorable geometry for you. Also, in the context of Team Fortress 2, there could be a sticky trap or a heavy really close to the corner, so you really just want to be taking corners wide, especially as the long-range class. If you're having a hard time, make sure you have mouse acceleration turned off in both Windows and in the Team Fortress 2 settings, because having this turned on will completely throw off your aim. The Spy is a low-health, fast-moving class. He is also probably the most complex mercenary in Team Fortress 2, at least for new players to learn. At its core, Spy's gameplay loop is relatively simple. Use your tools to get behind, and then use this position to ambush the enemy. In practice, this can be rather difficult because the game has been out for 17 years, and veteran players have already experienced all of Spy's tricks 1,000 times over. To make matters worse for Spy, tf2 is extremely buggy, and his disguise kit is negatively impacted by various visual glitches that can give him away. With all that being said, I'll do my best to give you an overview of the Spy so that you can get to backstabbing. I would say that there are 3 main phases to Spy's gameplay. The first phase is the crossing phase. This is usually at the start of the round or when you respawn. Your ideal position as a Spy is behind the other team, and you want to get there without dying or being detected. The main tool you can use to cross is your Invis Watch, which renders you invisible when you right-click. You can still collide with enemy players when invisible, which will give away your location by making you slightly visible to the other team. Try to avoid this whenever possible because you are vulnerable when cloaked. You can't shoot your gun without decloaking first, but you can certainly still die. If you bump into a Pyro when you're invisible, you are pretty much completely fucked. I should also mention that if you run out of cloak, your decloak sound will be even louder than usual, alerting any nearby players of your existence as long as they have decent headphones. You can pick up ammo packs to replenish your cloak meter to prevent this from happening. If you manage to get behind the other team without getting barbecued by a Pyro, blown up by a soldier, or shredded by a heavy, congrats. The hard part is over since Spy is at his most vulnerable when crossing. At this point, you should be looking for an isolated opponent to attempt to stab or shoot. If your target isn't isolated, it reduces your chance of securing the kill and increases your odds of dying even if you get the kill. Similar to Soldier, getting a trade can definitely be worth it on Spy, and he's pretty good at securing trades. Before decloaking, you will want to use your disguise kit to disguise as an enemy if you haven't already. The best disguise is very situational, but generally speaking, disguises are not meant to fool the other team for an extended period of time. More on that in a bit. Similar to Scout and Soldier, the Spy is usually going to want to pick his fights. If you're playing against aware players, going in for a stab without any other distractions will usually end poorly for you. You will want to commit when you see your opponents are distracted or you see a low health enemy who you can gun down. As you're waiting for your opportunity, you can steal the other team's health packs, zap their teleporters, and even revolver them from a safe distance if you're feeling extra annoying. Before I commit on a target, I will usually look around and make sure there's nobody to ruin my stab before I decloak. Usually I will attempt to do this around a corner or behind a prop to help mask the distinct sound, as well as to prevent the target from spotting me. Remember, there's a brief animation lock where you can't attack after decloaking. Once you have committed for a kill and hopefully gotten it, you enter the third phase of Spy's gameplay loop, the escape. Upon backstabbing an enemy, the victim will scream in pain, so any aware players in a 20-foot radius will all turn and look at you. At this point, you have 2 options. Cloak away and attempt to live so you can reset to phase 2, or you can stand your ground. There's no correct answer since this is situational, so the best play will have to be determined by your own intuition. For example, in many lobbies, players will be extremely unaware, so you can just go on a killing spree, and in other lobbies, getting a second kill will be near impossible. Even in a decent amount of games, getting the first kill can be difficult because of the level of awareness that experienced players possess. I suppose I should mention the Spy's secondary weapon, the Sapper, which is only useful for sapping engineers' buildings. The Sapper disables any buildings it's placed on, so it's usually best to sap a sentry gun before you go for a backstab on an engineer, or stab him and immediately sap the sentry gun so it doesn't turn around and kill you. You can kill a sapped building even faster by shooting it with your revolver, although this usually isn't necessary. The only other class besides Engineer who can remove a sapper is the Pyro if they have the Homewrecker equipped, so if you don't see any Pyros or Engineers nearby, you can simply let the sapper do its thing. And that pretty much summarizes Spy's gameplay loop. This seems relatively simple, but like I said, there's a lot of learning that needs to happen before a Spy is able to be effective. Here's a ton of tips to hopefully accelerate the process. As I alluded to earlier, the main purpose of a disguise is to prevent enemy sentries from shooting you, as well as to fool opponents for the split second you need to stab them. This is a bit of a generalization. You can certainly be successful as a spy by simply not being seen until it is too late, but there are situations where using your disguise to hide in plain sight is extremely effective. I personally have been nominated for a number of Oscars because of my impeccable acting as a spy. So if you're an intermediate TF2 player looking to up your game, you can try to fool the other team using your disguise. I don't want to digress too much here, and I know that there are resources available on YouTube for acting as a spy, so I'll keep this brief. Literally just enter the headspace of whatever class you're disguised as and ask yourself, what would they be doing right now? And then do that thing. What medic wouldn't trust the heavy with teleporter trails, right? Don't underestimate the power of your revolver. By design, the Spy is a weak 1 vs 1 class because his kit allows him to get behind for free. This doesn't mean that you can't win fights. Overconfident players can be gunned down in 3 to 4 well-placed shots. Spy will match the speed of his disguises, so unless you are trying to fool the other team, disguising as an enemy spy or medic means that you won't be slowed down. If you disguise as a scout, you won't run any faster, which will give you away, but the scout is shorter than the spy, so you will be less visible. For this reason, the scout disguise is my go-to for when I'm trying to be as sneaky as possible. When disguised, you can switch the weapon your disguise is holding by pressing B. This will switch your disguise to the weapon they have equipped in that slot. You can also have your disguise appear to reload their weapon by reloading your revolver. Just keep in mind that shooting your gun or swinging your knife will undisguise you, so you will have to have a partially unloaded revolver prior to disguising for this to work. I basically never use the fake reload tech in my gameplay. Speaking of disguising, when you disguise, the spy emits smoke. This smoke will continue to be shown even if you cloak, so make sure you don't disguise right before you cloak or your position will be given away for a few seconds. Try to get in the habit of disguising after you cloak or disguising in your own spawn. The Scout, Sniper, and Pyro have throwable secondaries that douse you in some sort of liquid. When covered in Girardi, Mad Milk, or gas, you will be partially visible even when cloaked. Cloaking will reduce the duration of these effects, as well as reduce the duration of Afterburn and Bleed, which also give you away while invisible, so it can be worth it to cloak in this situation. Also, the Invis Watch has a flat damage reduction, which can save you in some niche situations. And finally, snipers have an unlock called the Razorback, which prevents them from dying to a backstab. If you attempt to backstab a Razorback sniper, it will momentarily prevent you from stabbing again and keep you from changing weapons. This is really annoying, but the Razorback prevents the sniper from getting overhealed, so you can just shoot him instead. Also, you can two-shot a Razorback sniper with the Ambassador or the Enforcer. Lastly, and I know that I'm opening Pandora's box right as the video is almost over, but here goes. The Spy's backstab hitbox is incredibly generous. You can abuse this in many ways, getting backstabs on opponents who are very aware of your presence. If this is something you are interested in, you can find trick stabbing tutorials on YouTube because, to be frank, I'm not very good at trick stabbing, so I'm not going to go over how to do it in this video. And that is all the tips I have for the Spy, at least for now. I was originally planning on including guides for all of the subclasses in this video, such as Demonite and Trollger, but this project has already taken a very, very long time to make. I am sure most people watching can think of something that I forgot to mention during this video. I personally had to resist going on a 2-minute tangent during pretty much every single mercenary section because there are so many fun and unique weapons in TF2. If I took the time to mention all of them, this video would have probably never gotten finished. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see how to play every subclass in TF2 video, or if you have any other topics you want covered. If you're a brand new player and you find yourself confused about anything, whether it be a setting, a poorly explained mechanic, or whatever else, feel free to ask in the comments section. I also have a video in which I go over TF2's terrible default settings, as well as a guide on how to increase your game's visual clarity, so your question may be answered there as well. Anyways, thank you for making it this far in the video. I hope you learned something, and if you didn't, I hope you were at least entertained.
Okay, I'm scared block the yes.
Dude, he's blocking the pack!
You've been outplayed.
That took 100. That.
I want like 50.